nobody says, well, exactly how many drinks does it take to make an alcoholic? But
Right.
people want to know how many hours of gaming is problematic. And I think this is to your point earlier, that it's not always about frequency, right? That it's about the consequences that are resulting as a part of someone's behavior.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're coming to you today with a special guest, two special guests to be specific. From the Faithful and True team, we have got David Delmonico. David, we have the rare occasion to have you actually in town visiting us, which we're very excited about. Great to see you in person. Of course, as usual, we have Dr. Greg Miller, the host of the podcast, with us, and a special guest that has been brought to us by David. David, I'll let you introduce Steve.
All right. Yeah, we're lucky to have Steve Kuniak with us. Steve is a colleague of mine, university professor who specializes in gaming, aspects of gaming, both problematic gaming as well as how to use gaming in counseling for resiliency. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him today. Thanks for the welcome, Randy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when David first mentioned Steve and Steve's expertise, I just thought that it would be a great resource for our audience, recognizing that a lot of the men who struggle also with unwanted sexual behavior and sexual addiction behavior with the internet and pornography, many of them also talk about how gaming historically and maybe even currently has been a challenge for them. So, Steve, we're very glad that you are here.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Thank
you.
So
just to begin with, tell us a little bit about how you began to be interested in studying gaming from an academic perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a gamer since I was 4 or 5 years old, since I was old enough to hold a controller, I usually say. And so I had been gaming just all sorts of, I game broadly. I play all sorts of different types of games. And so I was doing that through college, which is really where I developed a close bond with a group of friends that I met in my dorm who were also gamers. And it was towards the beginning of my senior year at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And I needed to come up with an idea for a senior thesis in the psychology program. And I was struck by this idea that there were all of these different stories that were starting to crop up about that time about problematic gaming patterns, particularly gaming associated with violent behavior. So this is really when we started to see a lot of the school shootings that were just starting to really become, unfortunately, kind of a norm. And everything seemed to go back to, well, and they played video games, and they were interested in, comic books or things like that. And so I developed a senior thesis around the alternative idea because I'd been gaming for forever and reading comic books and watching science fiction movies and things like that. And I'm not very violent as goes. And so even though I play rather violent video games sometimes, and so that struck me that a lot of the people that I knew also weren't violent or aggressive people. And so I wondered what's good about this stuff and what's different. So like why some people maybe are affected by this negatively and some people aren't. And so the first study I took a look at in my undergrad program was on, I decided to kind of focus it ended up not being as much on gaming because I couldn't find enough literature to support a literature review on gaming at the time. I looked more broadly at fantasy and how fantasy might help to improve someone's resilience. I was looking at, the works of Joseph Campbell and, the Hero with 1,000 Faces and all of this stuff. And it wasn't actually until I then got into my master's and my doc program that I had another opportunity to look at gaming more specifically, to take this topic. And at that point, more research was coming out about gaming. So I could draw upon that for a better lit review. But also, go ahead.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So is it possible that someone would say, I do spend a lot of time gaming and it's not necessarily disruptive to the rest of my life? So it's not maybe the one attribute of I spend a lot of time doing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's problematic.
Yeah, I would think that that's possible. That there are people who can spend what others might think was an excessive amount of time gaming, but for them is not problematic.
That part of it may be the outside expectation. So, for instance, if I'm in a relationship, or if I have a secondary job, or I'm married, if I start to see that my gaming is disruptive in those spaces, then that may be something I want to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm married, and I have a he's going to be 20 months old soon, son. And like as these different transitions have happened in my life, I still game a lot, but I game less because I have to devote time to other aspects of my life. So yeah, I think adjustment is normal, really.
Right. Well, and maybe because one of the questions that we get from our community, our clients, is, how do you know when it's too much? Or we may casually talk about being addictive to gaming, simply because the amount of time that somebody is spending. But maybe one of the factors to really look at is, do I have the capacity to adjust and accommodate my gaming in accordance to the rest of my life? And what may be true is it's not problematic to me, but it is problematic to my spouse. And that's something that I need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good assessment. I think it's like addiction or abuse definitions when we assess people for that, this impacting the rest of your life, or are you experiencing any negative consequences with this behavior? If someone's not, well, then maybe that's not necessarily a problem for them. They are, that's really something to look at that,
And in your research, were you able to kind of distinguish between those that and those that invested in it maybe a significant amount of time, and yet it wasn't problematic?
Yeah. I think of the folks that I've surveyed before, people were pretty able to identify whether or not they had any sort of negative consequences related to their gaming. Now, the question, I think the next question would probably be, but did they do anything about it? And that varied greatly. But certainly with my client population, and in the folks that I've surveyed for the handful of studies I've conducted, folks would be able to identify, participants would be able to identify if it was.
And are there certain categories of problems that they identify? Like, would you say these are the top 5 or whatever problems that excessive gaming can create?
I don't know that I mean, I could probably come up with some categories off the top of my head. I don't know if I've thought about that a lot. A lot of the folks that I get complaints about are usually children who are brought in by their parents, even later stage adolescents who are brought in by their parents, because the parents see a problem with gaming, or with the amount of time spent gaming. And so one of the big things that comes up there, I guess two things in that category when parents bring their kids in, it's either not following through with their chores or their grades or whatever the case may be, or having some sort of a negative impact there. And then the other one is impulse control or aggression is the other one. And parents will blame, well, I see them playing this game, and then they get really angry, or they get angry at the game, or it seems like they're angry even when they're not playing the game or whatever. Or one of the big complaints I've gotten is, it's time to go, it's time to get to dinner or something like that. And so we go to take the controller away and they get angry at us. And so there's certainly layers to all of that. One of the things that I ask people to consider is, David can vouch for this with me. We're both in the greater Pittsburgh area. And so there's a fascination with the Pittsburgh sports teams in the area. And so a lot of times I'll then ask the parents, if I came into your house on a Sunday afternoon and took the controller off of you and turned off the Steelers game, how would you react to me doing that? And it's, well, I'd be really upset with you. I'd be really angry with you. I'd probably throw something at you, whatever. That's the same reaction that your kid's giving. So I don't know that it has to do with the game. It might just be that you're taking away a preferred activity when they don't want that to happen. But I do think that there are people who struggle anyway, or who aren't practicing good impulse control, or who aren't, practicing good time management. I think that's certainly is the case.
Greg, I think I just wanted to chime in for a second. I think it's just like other addictions, right? That there are people who are social drinkers who don't have problems with alcohol. And, I think there are people who can game and not have problems with it. And so it's not just about frequency. I always kind of tongue in cheek say, nobody says, well, exactly how many drinks does it take to make an alcoholic? But people want to know how many hours of gaming is problematic. And I think this is to your point earlier, that it's not always about frequency, right? That it's about the consequences that are resulting as a part of someone's behavior. When we look to diagnose somebody, one of the things that we're taught around diagnoses is it's not a diagnosis unless it's impacting the person negatively, and so we have to pay attention to those things, including when a partner comes in and says, I can't connect intimately with my wife, my husband, because they're distracted by gaming. That's a problem in the relationship that then needs to be addressed. So regardless of that frequency, I think we're looking at that that intensity, that duration, that interference with other activities.
Well, and the other piece that we would add is, and what is the role that it is playing in the person's life?
Right.
We often talk about sex addiction. It's not about sex, it's about how you're using sex. And so if I have this unhealthy relationship with gaming that encourages me, supports me to exit my reality and not deal with whatever is going on in life, that's when it begins to be problematic. And I gotta own, I'm not a gamer. I kind of grew up in the time, Pong was the original game that came out when I was in high school, and I just never bought into it. It just made me anxious. Tried a couple of different times to connect with my son through gaming, so that was never my thing. And yet, one thing I would say is my experience in watching gaming is that it really is suited well to exit your reality. That, it's about what's going on with, auditory, it's going on with visual, it's going on tactily as you maneuver the controller. So it really does seem to be created well to help you exit out of your reality. Is there a point where we acknowledge that's part of the goal, that we do want to exit? And is there a point where that exiting does become problematic?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like any other activity, if you exit for too long, and that will vary depending on the person, but too much, seek opportunities to exit at inappropriate times or inappropriate amounts of time or things like that. I think that all of that can become problematic. I don't necessarily think the act of exiting reality is problematic in and of itself. There are times where any one of us would, whatever your activity of choice is, you reach that flow state in it where you're doing it and you sort of almost exit yourself in a way. I think, like, again, southwestern Pennsylvania area, a few of my relatives are hunters, like to go out in the woods and try to kill Bambi. Never was my thing, but a lot of times they go out into the woods, never really shooting at anything. They go out in the woods to just sit in nature for a while and escape the day-to-day grind. And, I can remember that even with my dad. He never killed a deer, but he liked to go hunt and he liked to just sit in the woods. So I think that that's a similar experience for me when I'm in reality in a virtual space. But I have to kind of keep a monitor of myself that I have to come back. I have to come back. I have a job to do. I have a son to take care of. I have, I have my wife. We have pets. I have responsibilities, and so I can exit, but I have to. But it would be the same as my dad. He would do it. He would have to come back to work. He would have to, he would have to come home in the evening, and things like that. So I think that yes, there is, to David's example, there is, but I don't know what that amount of time is or what that amount of engagement is. I think it's just if. It looks like everybody paused for a moment. It's if it brushes up against things and gets in the way. I don't know if you got all that.
We did.
We were able to hear you, Steve. Yeah.
And I think part of it, and we do talk about this, kind of whatever language you use, the difference between healthy detachment or healthy coping and addiction. Addiction is that attempt to escape with no desire to return.
Right.
Healthy coping is simply setting aside a difficult or painful or tiring reality, and for a season, for a moment, do something else, always with the intent of going back to the reality that I was in. The wise person knows that there's nothing in the game or in the TV show that's going to change my reality. And when this game is over, the show is over, I'm going to go right back to whatever was true prior to the game beginning. For the addicted person, it's that exiting with the belief, the hope that by doing this, my reality will change.
Yeah.
I think, Greg, one of the reasons I wanted to ask Steve to come to the podcast and invite him here was listening to my own clients talk about sometimes their struggle with gaming, right, within their relationship, but also sometimes how they feel judged by the world as gamers, that I have a younger client who, his primary social connections, given his current life circumstances, is through his gaming. And I think one of the points I want to make is that just because it's different than the way we get our needs met doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? And there is a difference between how people cope, how people exit, how people create social experiences and have these relationships with other people, whether they're relationships they already have in their life. And so, I have a client who games a lot with his family, and that's his way of connecting with his brothers and his uncles and his cousins, and people who've met just for the first time, but develop relationships. So I think sometimes we have in mind that, oh my gosh, it's an online relationship. That doesn't count, And I think that, and Steve, maybe you can comment on this. It's not just about gaming. Gaming in the world today has a very social aspect to it for the most part. There's a lot of games that you can play that don't have that interconnectedness. But for a lot of guys that I know who struggle with intimacy, who struggle with relationship building, is gaming the place where I want them to only have relationships? No. But if it's a place where they can feel connected and can develop intimacy, that is where I want them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think some of my fondest, best memories of gaming have been spent with other people accomplishing a task together in a virtual space. So it doesn't have to be in a virtual space, but there's tasks that can be completed in a virtual space that can't be completed in real life. So like when my friends and I from college would get together, even after when we were in grad school or when we, had gotten into, our work and our family life and all that sort of stuff, when we could still join up and complete a raid in a game or something like that all together again. That's not something that we could do in real world, but we could still do this thing and accomplish this task together virtually. And it's not so much the completion of the task, it's we did this together.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we accomplished as a group together.
One of the basic desires, needs that we have is to be included. And one of the things I'm hearing you talk about is with this idea of the virtual community, it is real people connecting in this virtual space, but it is being included in something, whether it's included in accomplishing this task or being against the same enemy, whatever it may be. And I really affirm, David, what you said, this idea of having virtual community and connection can be a very good thing. And it's important that I do have community and connection outside of the virtual reality, that my ability to flow between the two has balance, and I'm able to do both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there statistics out there? Because really, I am very naive in this field of the difference in men to women who participate in gaming. Is it 50% now, or is there still more of a majority of males who participate?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I was just looking it up because I gave a presentation earlier today on this topic. The Entertainment Software Association, the ESA, is a nonprofit that tracks gaming-related stats. And one of their most recent bits of information is across all players, across all ages, 55% identify as male, 45% identify as female. And certainly I think they're not tracking things like non-binary individuals, but I would presume that's even more divergent. You're going to see more disparity. So the number of women who game is probably the greatest increase in population in the gaming industry.
So kind of the old stereotype that this is what junior high boys do. In our current reality, that's just not a valid interpretation anymore of what's happening in the gaming industry.
Yeah, not anymore. And the gaming industry is aware of that. So they're starting to tool and shape the game worlds to be more inclusive of this broader audience. There's a great image of, there's a character named Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider series, and in the early Tomb Raider games, she was very much stereotypically like them, that stereotypical sort of Barbie doll with her dimensions and everything. And so as you watch this character evolve over the years, the most recent incarnations of that character are much more realistic looking, because there's an understanding that the people who play this game, that it's a much broader audience who want a more realistic depiction of human beings in the game. Additionally, the games tend to be developed for people in their mid 30s, rather than for a junior high crowd. So game developers are targeting roughly 35-year-olds.
Well, and one of the things that's true is it's an industry, and you want to make money off of it, and so you're going to target the people who have the income that can be spent on it.
Well, yeah,
and
absolutely.
Your typical junior high boy isn't generating a lot of income and is dependent upon his parents buying the games. And so you do want to find those people with some sort of independent opportunity to purchase the games and support the industry.
Yeah, Greg, one more thing I just wanted to say before we wrapped up here is also just about the future of this idea of gaming. And I wanted, one of the things that Steve has shared with me is he's now started doing counseling in gaming. So he's actually playing games with people while he does therapy. And it's just an interesting perspective on where might this head, And so I think, Steve, you can talk about it, but I think you're seeing a young boy in Australia through Minecraft, for example.
Yeah, I've used Minecraft a couple of different times with folks. Most recently, I meet with someone across the world in Minecraft. And so it's interesting. It plays out like some of the other play therapy interventions that I've done before. But instead of having the table and attempting to sort of play with figures or things like that in this space in front of us, we kind of wrap ourselves in the space. And so every couple of weeks I meet up and we play for an hour and a half. I'm trying to think of what we did most recently. So like foraging for supplies and building a shelter and defending our base against a raiding village and things of that sort. And I think currently my client really wants to try to prepare to fight this type of dragon. And so as we're doing these sort of tasks, my clients will talk to me about other things that are going on in their lives, just like we would expect our clients to do in a play therapy intervention. But it's in a familiar space to the client. I can meet with them across a greater distance, not dealing with the struggles of an office location and all that sort of stuff. I'm coming to meet me, and we get to have these kind of rich conversations in a virtual environment.
Well, and isn't it true? We're all fighting dragons, whether virtually or metaphorically.
That's right.
And so, partnering with someone to figure out how to do that in a context that feels safe. I mean, I think that that's one of the big issues. If we can find environments and create environments that feel safe, then there's going to be much more progress done, because then there will be more openness and vulnerability.
Well, absolutely. And I think one of the best parts about games is that it allows us to practice in a safe way, whatever we want to practice. If I die in the game, it doesn't really matter. I just respawn and I try again. And isn't that really what we want of all of our clients? Not for them to die and respawn, but to keep going at the task over and over again, fail and learn and fail and learn and fail and learn. Like, isn't that the perfect therapeutic environment for clients? And that's what we do willingly in games. We just keep trying the task over and over again.
So just kind of as we come to a close, if I'm watching this podcast and listening to this, and I'm trying to determine if there's there is an unhealthy component, maybe an addictive component to my gaming, what would be some of the factors for me to look at? What should I consider? What's the lens I should evaluate the role that gaming has in my life to determine that it may actually be unhealthy and not productive?
So David can jump in on this too, because I think a lot of the questions that I would ask myself are the same questions that I would ask about any addictive behavior. Is it impacting my life negatively? Is it causing me any struggles with work, which could include, like, can I get up in time to go to work? Have I played through the night and now I can't get to my job on time, or whatever the case may be? Are my loved ones complaining about different behaviors, things like so? Like, what's the rest of the world informing me about my tasks? And then also, I would think, how do I react when I have to step out of that virtual space? There are times where I don't want to end, but I know I have to, and so I do. But I can think of times when I was younger or with my clients where when they're asked to end, even if they're given enough time and space to prepare for that, they still have a negative reaction to it. And I think that informs that maybe this is too much. Maybe I need to dial this back a little bit, or, what am I getting, as opposed to what is problematic about this for me? David, anything else you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think those are all good things, and things that we've talked about in the podcast. I think, Greg, you talked a little bit about that idea of escaping reality, and what is the function of this, and some reflection on what does gaming do for me? And if gaming isn't available, do I have other problem solving and coping strategies available to me? If the answer is no to that, then it's probably a good idea to develop some other problem solving and coping strategies for those times when you're on vacation and you don't have your Xbox or your PlayStation, right? That you have other ways to access other people, that you have ways to support yourself. So if the only, if your only method of problem solving and coping and escape is the gaming, it's probably going to result in some consequences in your life that you need to look at. So,
one thing I'm aware of is we all have limited resources. We have 24 hours a day. And when I make choices about my time, I've got to take that time from somewhere. And so maybe one of the questions is, if I'm spending an extended amount of time gaming, where am I taking that time from? Am I taking it from sleep? Am I taking it from school? Am I taking it from other responsibilities? And when I begin to recognize that there's a disproportionate amount of my resources going to this, and there are other costs, that's something that I would want to pay attention to. Even as a student in college, when you chose to invest in gaming, there were other things that, you weren't choosing to do. And as a college student, you had the freedom to do that. At other points in our life, we have to pay attention to either what is the cost or who else is paying the cost when I invest this amount of time and energy in this thing.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, Steve and David, thank you so much for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. It was our pleasure to have you on, and this is such an interesting subject matter that I'm sure a lot of our audience are going to really benefit from this conversation. So thanks again for joining us. To our listeners and viewers, thank you again for watching the podcast. We hope that if you're out there and you're struggling with an addiction, in our field of focus, it's helping men who struggle with sexual addiction. If that's your personal story, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com to visit our website. There you'll find many resources, including our men's workshop, which we offer every month. We invite you to take a look and consider registering for that event. Until we join you again, we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.